Good morning, my friends. I want to talk to you this morning about what's happening in Ukraine, or more particularly what's happening with Russia, and remind you, as I said before, to keep our eyes on Israel, because that's where the main game is, and that's where prophecy takes us. Now, for those of you who are believers and are Christians, you should be interested in what I'm going to say. For those of you who are not believers, if you'll listen to what I've got to say, it may help you to understand and to believe that the Bible is true, and therefore we need to take notice of what it says. Now, I've spoken to you in the past of the Gog and Magog war, which is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So I just want to have a look at that again in the light of what is happening. And let's see what Ezekiel says. Okay, I hope you can read that. Now, this is Ezekiel 38, verse 1. Now, the word of the Lord came to me, that's Ezekiel, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, Tubal, and prophesy against him. Okay. So let's just for a moment have a look at that verse. Son of man, set your face against Gog. Now, Gog is a person, but it's not talking about a particular person. The term Gog is a generic term meaning president, leader, prince, somebody in charge. He is the prince. So set your face against Gog of the land of Magog. So Magog, we know, is Russia. So up here we see Rosh. Rosh is Russia, and Magog is all of those stand countries around it. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and all of the other stands, they're all there. So Magog is a collection of Russia, which is Rosh, and all of those other stands that are there with it, okay? So what he's saying is set your face against Gog. So this is against the president. Now, some people are reluctant to say that President Putin is Gog that is mentioned here. I tend to think, in light of everything that's happening around the world and in the different countries of the world that are lining up with these prophecies. See, these prophecies were preached over 2,600 years ago, nearing 3,000 years ago, by Ezekiel, at a time when none of these countries existed as they do today, and the names are the same. But he said that these countries would come together in an alliance, and that God, well, we'll see in a minute about the hook in the jaw. So who was he talking about, and when was he talking about it? Well, this is the first time in history, in all history, that these countries, as Ezekiel spoke about them, have aligned and come together. Okay? So he said, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog. So we've seen that Magog is Russia. The prince of Rosh, that's Russia itself. So he's the leader of Rosh. So Gog is the president of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal. Now, Meshach and Tubal are modern-day Turkey, actually. So Meshach and Tubal are down here in Turkey, and prophesy against him. So God is against him. So God is saying, Son of man, I want you to direct your prophecy towards the president of the land of Magog, of Russia. He is the leader of Russia, of Rosh, and prophesy against him. So God is against him in whatever he's doing. Now, and say, thus says the Lord, behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws, and lead you out with all of your army, your horses and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, and all of them handling swords. Goes on to list a bunch of other countries that are there: Persia, which is modern-day Iran; Ethiopia, which is Sudan and Libya. They're all with them with their shields. So let's go back for a moment. So I will turn you around. Number one, the Lord is saying that I'm against you. You leader of let's call it Russia, because we know what we're talking about. I'm against you, leader of Russia. I'm going to turn you around. I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and lead you out. So that's what I want to talk about today, the hook in the jaw. So what has led Russia out to attack Ukraine? Now, there's a whole bunch of theories going around, and I am surprised and a little dismayed at the amount of Christians that are buying this garbage. There's a whole bunch of things saying that Russia has got all that Ukraine has got all these bioweapons and biolabs, not weapons, biolabs, and there's so much corruption there, and that Russia just had to come out and sort them out and get rid of this stuff off their border. Well, I've never heard anything so silly in my life. Russia recently put a couple of demands to the West. They wrote a letter, and I've spoken to you about this before. They wrote a letter, one to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and one to America. The one to America said basically, get lost out of Europe. We don't want you here. Go back home where you belong, and stay away from Europe. You don't belong in Europe. And the letter to NATO effectively said, you gave your word in an agreement that was signed sometime back, I forget the exact date, whereby you said that you would not encroach any further east than what you already are in the Baltic countries. Okay? So now let's see if I've got a picture of those Baltic countries. I think I have here somewhere. Yeah, there it is. So, okay, so like Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, all of those countries there, they've all become a part of NATO. But they signed an agreement that they wouldn't go any further east. Now, Ukraine is east, and Ukraine has applied to join NATO but hasn't yet got in. And that's why NATO is not protecting Ukraine at this point in time, because they're not a member of NATO. So effectively, the Russians said to NATO, you're not to come any further east, which they are trying to do by trying to get Ukraine into NATO. And they told America to get lost. Those were the two demands. So if these supposed biolabs that have been promoted all around the world were an issue, why didn't Russia bring it up? There's no written material anywhere. There's no letters whereby Russia has brought up their fear of biolabs so close to its border as being an issue. So why is everybody saying, well, Russia didn't want the biolabs there and that's why they've attacked? It just doesn't make sense. And, I get a bit dismayed at times at the amount of Christians who jump on every bandwagon that's going, that every time somebody says something. So what is actually happening, forget about that for the moment, is this a hook in the jaw? Okay, because America basically moved into Ukraine and started to treat it more like its own country than Ukraine was. Yes, of course there's corruption there, but what makes it any more corrupt than any other country in the world? For goodness sake, what makes Ukraine more corrupt than America? It's the Americans that went to Ukraine and are doing all of these crazy things. I said to you once before that Hillary Clinton and her mob started the war to get rid of the evidence of their corruption. Amen? So why do we pick on Ukraine's corruption when every other country in the world is just as corrupt as what they are? See how easy we can take our eyes off the ball? The ball is what God's doing. Okay? Now he's saying through Ezekiel that there will come a time when he's going to be speaking against the boss of Russia. He's going to say, I'm against you, O Gog, O President, the Prince of Russia, Meshech and Tubal. Now that's all in Turkey. Okay? I will turn you around and put hooks into your jaws and lead you out with all of your army. Okay, so can we assume that at the moment Russia has been led out of Russia, and the first place he's decided to stop is in the Ukraine? Okay? Ukraine is a huge country and it's got immense natural wealth. As I've said to you before, they've been left to starve by the Russians. Stalin did it when he took all the grain back to Russia and left the Ukrainian people to starve. At the USSR, they took all their infrastructure away. They just unbolted it, picked it up, be it the sugar mill or whatever it was. They just took it all back to Russia. So they're not going to give up, in my opinion, at the moment. They're not going to give up this fight. And Russia is now gearing up because the war hasn't gone very well for them at the moment. They expected this to be over in 3 or 4 days and put a puppet leader in place, one that was favourable to Russia and not to the West. And none of that has happened. They've lost thousands of men. They've lost hundreds of fighter planes. I mean, you can't believe either side when they're claiming down, but clearly Russia is not winning this war at the moment. So they've resorted to using cluster bombs on civilian populations. There's, again, part of the propaganda is that this isn't a war at all. This is not taking place. That Russia's just gone in there to save the Ukrainians from themselves. Well, if you want to believe that, you go ahead. I've never heard such rubbish in my life. You just have a look at what's going on over there. So what is actually happening now? I'm against you. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws. I will put a hook in your jaw and lead you out with all your army, horses and horsemen. Well, you can transfer that into modern day weaponry, tanks, splendidly clothed, a great army, bucklers, all of them handling missiles, swords, guns, weapons. Persia, Iran, Ethiopia and Libya are with them, all of them with shields and helmet. Gomer and all its troops, the house of Togarmah, from the far north and all its troops, many people are with you. Now, I have recently come across this map that I'm showing you that shows Gomer as being part of Poland, Czech, the people groups that are on the western side of Ukraine. John Hagee from Texas, he actually says that Gomer is Germany. Now, all the other information I have, I've always associated Gomer with Turkey, down here with Togarmah and Tubal in Turkey. But it seems that that information was wrong and that people have really studied where these people groups come from. John Hagee says Gomer is actually Germany and that Germany will be a part of this coming down against Israel again. Okay, so prepare yourself and be ready, you and all your companies that are gathered about you, and be a guard for them. After many days you will be visited, in the latter years you will come into the land of those who brought you back by the sword and gathered you many people. Okay, we won't go there at the moment. All right, so what is the hook? Now, this war has totally isolated Russia on the world stage. nobody's fighting to help Ukraine. They don't want to do that. They're just going to let the Ukrainian people die, those that can't get out in time. And Russia will flatten the country because he's got too much pride. He's 70-year-old. He's got all of these great ambitions for the empire of Russia. Now, when I say things about him, I'm not agreeing with him. I'm just telling you what he thinks. He wants to rebuild the USSR, which includes all of those NATO countries. So if he goes beyond Ukraine at this stage, that will start World War III, if it hasn't already started. And so he's been drawn out. Now, what's drawing him out? Okay, now his economy is oil and gas. It's energy. It's a one-string guitar. He has no other exports. Apart from a little bit of grain out of Ukraine, but that belongs to Ukraine, not to Russia, which is another reason why he wants it back. So he's got oil and gas, and America has finally been embarrassed enough to cut off imports from Russia of its oil and gas. Even though it's got all of these sanctions against Russia, they're still buying their oil. And Europe is going to freeze. So all of the woke governments in Europe and all the greenie governments and want all clean energy are now discovering that they are totally at the mercy of their greatest enemy. He's got the tap. He can turn the gas off. And Europe at the moment is suffering one of their coldest winters for a long time. And so they're going to freeze. And so they've got to get gas from somewhere. So it's been President Trump, he wanted to open up a pipeline through Greece and up through Europe that way out of Israel, because Israel has got enormous gas reserves and can supply Europe. Now, have a look at this. The Chevron CEO, Chevron is the oil company that operates the Israeli gas and fuel. Chevron CEO says the Israeli gas pipeline could supply Europe amid a crisis. The East Med pipeline, meant to transfer natural gas from Israel waters to Europe via Greece and Cyprus, was announced in 2016. Of course, the first thing that Biden did was stop that and open up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia to Germany, which now, reluctantly, Germany has put a stop on. Because the 45th president knew that to open this pipeline would put Europe at Russia's mercy, which they now are. And so Israel has approved a new gas route through to Europe, to Egypt. And so they've approved a route to Egypt from Jordan. Now, Egypt's ambitions to become a regional gas hub received a boost last week after the Madbouli government signed agreements with Greece and Israel that could help it grow exports to Europe. The US linked during Thursday's meeting of the East Mediterranean Gas Forum in Cairo could see Egypt import more natural gas from Israel and increase shipments to Greece, which have failed to pick up this year. So basically what they're saying is that they will, Israel will open up its taps and send more gas to Egypt through Jordan. Egypt will bottle it and send it to Greece, and Greece will pipe it up to Europe. Now, that's what the 45th president had in mind all the time, is that the pipeline directly from Israel to Europe would supply Europe's need at a quarter of the price that Russia is selling the gas to Europe now, with the danger of them cutting it off. And so all of these countries where all they worried about was green energy and solar panels where it's always cloudy and covered in snow so they don't work, and wind power, it drives people crazy with the noise. They relied so heavily on alternative energies that are totally unreliable and only work on the days that they want to work. whereas they could have taken gas and fossil fuels from these countries, and now they're being forced to consider starting up their coal-powered power stations again because they don't have the energy. It's been a real kick in the backside for all of those woke governments. And this is the reason why Biden now is grovelling on his knees to his enemies, to Iran and to Venezuela, to terrorist organisations that America has had sanctions on for quite some time. And now he's grovelling to them on his knees, begging them to sell him oil. He's got this green thing going in America where we can't, it doesn't matter if you contribute to pollution in Venezuela or in Iran, that's in somebody else's backyard. We'll still take your oil and burn it, but we just can't be seen to be producing it ourselves. Amen? And so he's grovelling. Now, he also went to Saudi Arabia and the UAE to get oil off them. They won't take his phone calls. Okay? Saudi Arabia had an Iron Dome protection system to protect them from incoming missiles. Biden stripped them of that. He took it all out and left them, and then he delisted the Houthis in Yemen as a terrorist organisation, and they've been firing missiles at Saudi Arabia ever since. So now he's begging on his knees for Saudi Arabia to sell him oil, and they won't even take his phone call, and I don't blame them. The whole root of this entire disaster we see around the world is Joe Biden. You can't put the blame anywhere else. He is the one that has caused everything. And so, my friends, what we're seeing now, I just want to finish up with this. What is the hook in the jaw of Russia? Okay, so Russia has become a pariah on the world stage. Nations everywhere are turning off the taps where they can, and they're not buying their oil and their gas. And now oil and gas is their single string guitar. It is a single string to their economy. They don't have anything else to export. So nobody's buying their oil anymore. But Israel is winding up its production, sending its oil and gas out through Jordan to Egypt, and from Egypt it's going up to Europe. And so had the 45th president been allowed to build that pipeline, Israel would be supplying Europe, Russia. But in order to keep the planet green, they've sold their souls, and they're now at the mercy of this murderous dictator who is about to plunge them into World War III. So it seems that if Russia can't sell its own oil and gas, it has to get it from somewhere, and it's going to come to Israel to get it. Is this leading us, my friends, to the war that is predicted in Ezekiel 38, where Russia is being led out of its own country, it's been led out and it's been led down, and God says in the end, and he said, when you come down, he said, I'm going to destroy you. So, my friends, I'm just contemplating whether this is the hook in the jaw or a hook in the jaw, and that this is the beginning. Do your own reading, do your own study, and come to your conclusions. But I can assure you, my friends, that this is not going to go away, and it could be that this is the beginning of the situation that Ezekiel described over 2,600 years ago, exactly as he described it. God bless you, my friends. You have a wonderful day, and go and do some study, and just keep your eyes on the ball. And the ball is what God says, not what all the propagandas say about the reason why this is all happening. It's certainly got nothing to do with biolabs. I can assure you of that. Keep your eyes on the ball, friends, in Jesus' mighty name.